Um, yeah. So those were kind of your major factions in socialist history. One way that I like to kind of summarize all that is Hal Draper's essay, The Two Souls of Socialism, which essentially asks, are we trying to build socialism from the top down or from the bottom up? And I think this is a really great way to think about it, about the different arguments in socialist history and which ones were more successful and not. So Draper argued that all the forms of socialism essentially boil down to either from above or from below. From above is when you appeal to authority, or rich people or a government or something like that. You appeal to them for funding. You work within it to reform it, or you want something like a worker state. You want to have kind of central control over changes, versus this more from below, from a bottom up point of view, where the working class has to build its own institutions that it runs itself, democratic institutions that can manage their own affairs. They don't have to appeal to anyone else. They do it themselves. And identified 6 points of from above that we should be critical of and watch for. Philanthropism, which is directly asking rich people to pay for it. I think that even goes into like taxing them, right? You tax them and then you make it happen. And well, we've seen how much that's worked, right? At least, in the ways that we'll get more into that. Elitism is the second one, where you kind of have this idea that there needs to be an elite, a vanguard, a highly educated group that kind of runs socialism until the mass people are ready for it, until they've been educated and organized for it. And so, of course, there's some concerns there about, are you creating a new, authoritarian oligarchy sort of situation instead of the working class freeing itself. You have planism, where you focus on social planning, where you just have someone that says, well, if we set up all these rules and we build a community, we do this thing, everything will work great. And that's trying to like create a blueprint for socialism and force it on people instead of allowing people to make their own institutions that make sense for them and their communities. You have communionism, where you're kind of afraid of embracing class struggle. You're kind of afraid of calling out rich people, right? Like you're instead like, well, we just all want to work together for better. And so there's some concerns there with like, I think that really mostly gets to the idea of like the middle class, right? Like middle class people in the US like to think of themselves as being more wealthy. They want to be more like the rich people. But for the most part, they're actually the working class. They're actually they don't own property, they don't own businesses and all. So like you kind of have this thing where you want to be careful about how you talk about class struggle. Essentially, there's permeation, where you join the establishment to slowly reform the centers of power from within. That's what we hear a lot from progressive Democrats, essentially, right? Like even the ones that kind of identify as socialist, but then they go work in the Democratic Party, right? Like if we go in, we can change it from within. And then finally, socialism from the outside, which is saying that we can't really do it internally. We have to wait for someone else to come save us, which could be, an external power of some kind. Wayne Price wrote an essay, Socialism from Above or Below, that was a response to Draper's essay from a more anarchist perspective, because Draper does reference some old Marxist works that were very critical of anarchism that I think kind of misrepresented some of the anarchist points because of that conflict we were talking about, right, at the First International. So that there's, there were some misrepresentations from both directions, I think. So what's nice is if you read these two together, you get a really good kind of overview of all the ideas.